Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to Series 4 of the Climate Pioneers Show. For any first-time listeners, thank you so much for joining us. Here at the Climate Pioneers Show, every series that we do has a different focus. In Series 1, Building a Better Future, we featured the stories of early-stage startup founders in the UK. In Series 2, Funding a Better Future, we interviewed top climate tech investors from across the UK and Europe to hear their views of what the funding landscape looked like in 2023. And in Series 3, Two Pence Worth, we interviewed female climate founders to discuss the gender funding gap and why only 2% of VC money was going to female-founded businesses. And now we're back for Series 4, Building a Better Future, the US edition, where we're going to be featuring the stories of climate tech innovators on the East Coast of the US. Throughout the course of this series, I'm going to be learning all about their journeys and the solutions that they're developing to fight the climate crisis. We're going to dig into what inspired them to take action in the first place and the challenges that they faced along the way. But most importantly, we're going to be getting their tips and advice on the best communities to join, the best books to read, the best podcasts to listen to, and the best productivity hacks to help you manage the founder work-life balance. So let's get stuck in. This week, I am delighted to be joined by Emiel Cockx, CEO of Genvision. Founded in 2022, Genvision's technology analyzes satellite images of nature with AI to measure carbon removal more accurately. And Emiel certainly hasn't had the most linear or obvious path into being a climate tech founder. He's an award-winning cellist who's performed across the world with an academic background in civil engineering and architecture, again winning awards, but this time for 3D modelling nature and sustainable engineering. And with a track record like that, I'm very excited to learn more about his journey and the plans that I'm sure he has in store for Genvision. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much, Sherry. Really happy to be here.
My pleasure. So we always kick off by learning more about your business. So I've given a little bit of a summary there, a very brief one of what Genvision does. But can you talk me through in your own words, what is the problem that you're solving and how are you solving it?
Yeah, we're aiming to solve one of the bigger challenges in the climate change big problem right now, which funnily enough is measuring trees. There's just like a ton of money flowing towards removing as much carbon from the air as possible. And well, a lot of that has to come from just planting a bunch more trees and selling carbon credits. And there's like a whole set of systems that are involved in it. But in the entire system, there's like one really tiny part which we still rely on manual labor, which is measuring trees, measuring how much carbon is actually being removed. And so literally currently that happens by measuring trees with tape measures in forests.
Really?
Super expensive. It takes a lot of time. It's not very transparent, and it certainly cannot scale with this market that is developing so rapidly. So at Genvision, we're developing technology to do just that. We do very accurate measurements scientifically of how much carbon is being removed in nature using satellite imagery. And we've developed our own technology to make sure that we can scale that really accurately, reliably, but also much faster and much more affordably than any current solution.
Amazing. And that's so important, right? Because I think one of the biggest challenges that the carbon removal space has had this year is around the verification of, are these trees being planted? And if they are, how efficiently are they being planted? How much are they growing? And therefore, how much carbon are they really capturing?
Exactly. Yeah. So there's so much issue with trust in this space, which is really a pity because we know that if you want to have a chance to fight climate change whatsoever, like all scientists agree that we need to remove as much carbon from the air as possible. And at the same time, there seems to be a little bit of a pushback against all these massive projects that want to do this, that want to remove carbon. And we feel that we're uniquely positioned with our company and the solution that we're bringing to bring trust back into that market and to scale that around the globe as fast as possible.
Amazing. I love that. And so where did your passion for climate and sustainability come from? Is it something you've always been passionate about since childhood, or is it something that's kind of come in as you've got older?
It's definitely something that I've been very passionate about for a while now. Actually, I've been carbon neutral myself for about 5 years now, which means that I measure every year how much carbon I'm emitting. So I try to like track every flight that I take, try to give an estimate of how much meat I'm eating, and then come up with a number every year. And then I'm going to support projects through the system of carbon credits, which means that I can remove just as much carbon from the air as I'm emitting into the air. And it's just one way for me that I'm trying to do some good in the world of climate change. And that's been something I've been working on for a while for myself personally. But then really through that experience, learn about like one of these like really big bottlenecks that's really hindering a lot of development of cool technologies and cool new things that come through. And I thought it makes a lot of sense to actually just double down on this. So that's kind of like how I entered this space.
Amazing. So it was sort of something you were doing personally and interested in personally, and then through that thought, right, I'm going to make this my work.
Yeah,
Cool.
exactly.
Yeah. And talk me through that pathway that I sort of alluded to there at the beginning, that journey from kind of musician to engineering and architecture to tech entrepreneur. How did you kind of weave that path?
So when I was 6 years old, it was a moment when I decided I want to be an architect. Which is
Right.
really funny because I'm not an architect right now, but certainly at some point in my life I will get back to it. It's a really big passion of mine. I love thinking about space, how people come together, about the sustainability part of it, but also where sort of like arts meets engineering. I think it's still super fascinating. And then when I like got close to becoming 18 and going to study civil engineering and architecture, which had always been my dream, I actually got the opportunity to study cello at the Conservatory in Brussels
Wow.
with really good cellists and had the opportunity to combine both studies. So super interesting combination, architecture and music.
Yeah.
There's a lot of parallels. They're kind of like obvious as like rhythm or structure, but then also like underlying sort of like the methodology or like the way we think about how does music move us so emotionally, and how can we create similar spaces in architecture? Something that's always fascinated me a lot, and it
Yeah.
was really interesting to be able to combine both studies. I actually ended up like studying those in like two different locations in Belgium for my undergrad, which was not very convenient. I had to take a lot of trains. So that's why I eventually ended up in UC Berkeley, where I was able to do my master's in architecture, and which was right next to the music building. Was able to set up some research between both faculties. It was a super interesting topic. But yeah, it's like that is kind of like the background
Yeah.
behind like something what I'm doing right now, which is not related to music, not related to architecture at all, but I still draw a lot from it.
Yeah, and I like those comparisons you made between architecture and music and that kind of the rhythm and you know I think there's things to do with harmony there and yeah I think that they're more similar perhaps than from the outside you might expect they would be. And how did you then bridge that gap into tech entrepreneur? Like where did the inspiration come from to actually start your own business? And I know it's sort of you said there it had partly come from your own personal analysis of your own carbon footprint and how to be carbon neutral, but where did the aha moment come from where you had the idea for Genvision and thought I'm going to do this?
Yeah, while I was at Berkeley, I was doing a lot of research around 3D modeling of nature. I always find it fascinating when designing architecture to design a lot with nature, obviously because of like the passion for the environment. And I was also always very frustrated by how hard it is as an architect to actually design something with nature. Because
Right.
walls are very straight and like buildings, like you can design them in 3D, no problem. But when it comes to an oak tree or a specific oak tree, or trying to think about like how does this ivy flow around this building, it's something that's much harder to draw in 3D. But since all architects are working in 3D software, it means that it's like much harder to actually design green cities. So that's the sort of like research that I was doing at UC Berkeley was around like how can we create that experience like much better, make 3D models of nature, use AI in that process to make it much more natural and much less complex. So initially, it was really out of the framework of how can we make designing greener cities much easier. But then eventually that became like only like a really small part of what we were doing. It turned out that using that technology of that 3D modeling of nature that I continued to work on after I graduated was actually like going to be the key to solving a really, really big problem in the climate space. So we kind of like stumbled into it. I'm so glad we did, and that I took some time to not dive directly into to furthering my architecture studies uh, just because I feel like with as like a climate entrepreneur, there's the opportunity to just make so much more impact than
Mm.
designing a little bit more of a sustainable home for the 1% richest people.
Yeah, exactly. And so where did you put the one together to make two with, okay, this is the 3D modeling work that I've done over here, and here's a potential, here's a problem space, and here's how I can marry the two together?
It's actually quite a funny story where like initially it was like very focused on making these 3D models just for architects. And I thought this is the one solution that everybody needs. And they're gonna like, I just need to develop this technology and then everybody's gonna pay me for these 3D models of trees. And turns out like nobody's interested in this. Nobody has money for it. Nobody has time for it. And actually, there are not that many architects, and certainly not that many architects that specifically need these type of 3D models of trees. And at the same time, there was like somebody who had heard of our project who was working on autonomous lawnmowers. Also, not your average niche, but very interesting space. Autonomous are these like little robots with a camera actually that learns to do lawn mowing by itself by just like identifying in the garden like what's happening.
Oh, well,
And
I
he
guess
ran
they have
up
hoovers. They have hoovers that do that in the house, right? So I guess that's the next
exactly.
phase.
Yes. But then it's like a slightly more advanced with cameras to just like identify not only where's the grass, but also like where are people, where are dogs, where's trees. And so he was like, what if like currently we're spending so much money and so much time collecting all of the data, like all of these like images for the robot to learn what a person is and what a tree is. And it costs a lot of money on like labeling all of those images and collecting them. But if you create like with the 3D models I was able to create with that little like startup that I started, it was like, you're actually solving a really big problem for us. And it's like, oh yeah, but cool, but I'm actually working for architects, so like not really taking note of it. And it wasn't until like much later and like a lot of calls that he like kept coming back to us that I was like starting to realize like, hey, actually, it might make sense to start thinking about what are the other applications of what we're able to do here. And then really rapidly it turned out it solves that data problem is not only useful for lawnmowers, it's just a general AI problem that a lot of companies need a lot of good data. And if you have good data that you can work with, you can solve some big problems.
Yeah, great. And at what point did you become aware of the trust and verification problem in the carbon removal space, and how this could apply to that?
So funnily enough, like through the project that I've been supporting, like since I've been 18, like so buying those carbon credits to offset my own emissions, I've actually been aware of the space for a while, and it's kind of funny how it's like always like kind of mad about the fact that like why can't you just like plant a bunch of trees? Like I did the math in my head, and like if I just buy some land in Ukraine and then plant some trees, like it should be cheaper than what I'm actually paying right now. Like where is this money going, and why is this not the most cost-effective way yet to support climate change, or to support the fight against climate change rather? And then like became aware of like there is this obviously this whole measurement process and verification process, which is super important, is we want to be sure that we're actually doing something good and not just greenwashing, not just throwing away our money. So it's a problem I've been aware for a while, but didn't realize that like the key to solving it might actually been something I've been working on for a while already.
Amazing. And at what point did you kind of go all in with this? So were you doing this alongside your studies, or did you start developing it after you'd graduated? What was the timeline like there? And at what point did you go all in and incorporate this as a business and start going for it?
I was very fortunate to graduate with a little bit more money than I started out with through a bunch of support networks, like scholarships, and which is just like a very like large privilege that I can enjoy. Um, that meant that I had like about 6 months of time left after I graduated that I could travel around a little bit, just with my laptop and work on some projects. Which, if anybody like listening like has the opportunity, I would recommend so much. And that for me was just like something I want to just work on some ideas, not sure if it's going to work out, not sure what it's going to lead to, but it sounds interesting. And who knows, maybe one day it's going to be something. In any case, I'm learning a lot from it. And so for me, that was kind of like the initial idea. And then while doing it, it became more and more of a serious thing, more realized that like, hey, we might actually be onto something here. That's at that point that I ran out of my 6 months of money and just like moved back into my parents' home in Belgium. Had no money to spend anymore on food, on traveling. We just like stayed with them, ate their food. And so that was kind of like the start of the whole process. So again, it's a very privileged role to start from, but obviously, like we're a little bit better off now. I guess it's the start of a lot of startup stories. Is really it starts with not a lot.
Yeah, but I like that you had the time and space to explore the idea and that view of like, I've got 6 months, I'll play with the idea, I'll see where it goes. And then it sounds like by the time the money ran out, you knew you were onto something and you knew this was worth pursuing and it was worth moving back home and taking the cut financially to focus on it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Perfect. And so you've been going 18 months now, is it?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, 18 months. And so what has that first 18 months looked like? Talk me through from moving back in with your parents, and I think we're onto something here, to where you are now.
It's at that point where we're like, hey, there is something here, and that's like when we had the call with the lawnmower guy and some like other companies that like were like, oh, maybe this might be interesting for us. That's at the point where we were in touch with an accelerator in New York called ERA, Entrepreneurs Roundtable Accelerator. And we applied to them. We got accepted for their summer program. That was in 22, so last year. And that meant that all of a sudden we had $100,000 of investment that we could work with. We had this 4-month program. And also that meant that my co-founder, a good friend of mine that I know like since forever, was able to join me full time as well and move to New York. So we had 4 months in New York, rented this tiny little apartment, like all the way up in Harlem. And we were like still paying way too much money. We like had like 2 little mattresses in the corner. It's just a real testament to our friendship. It actually worked out. But that support network there through ERA, that accelerator, we learned how to pitch, how to put together a deck, how to approach new customers. We're put in touch with a ton of investors. And at the end of the program, there was this demo day where we got to pitch to a ton of investors. And we're like, hey, this is a story of what we're building. Are you interested in coming along? And that eventually led to raising a pre-seed round, with which we were able to hire some really amazing and talented people. And then we can develop our first technology in the real world, test it out, and release it to our first customer. So it's really all these like tiny little steps that come together. But I really trace like the biggest step back to that initial investment from the accelerator and all the help that we got there.
That's amazing. And you're right, it is. It's those tiny little incremental steps, isn't it, over that first year, which each one doesn't feel particularly significant, but you get to the end of a year and look back and think, oh my goodness, look how far we've come. Yeah, okay, amazing. And so when did you close the pre-seed, and then how did you find that process of being a first-time founder and building that team out for the first time?
Yes. So we closed the pre-seed round. It was $1.2 million earlier this year, so like the first half of 2023. And we were able to rely on like all the learnings from that accelerator about like what are the type of questions that you need to be prepared for, what are the types of documents that you need to have ready. And this like not to be underestimated. Our first like literally like first investment that we're supposed to get, like I get this phone call from a guy who's like the CEO of a very big company, but like somehow like found his way to us, and also a Belgian guy in New York. It's like, let's have coffee. I want to hear about what you're doing. Turns out he went to the same high school as me.
Oh, wow.
Super crazy coincidence. And he's like, after half an hour over coffee, he's like, I'm super interested. I want to invest in you. And I'm like, okay, cool, but I don't know what that means.
Now
And so
what?
scramble home, like call people, and they're like, you have to have lawyers. They have to like prepare these documents. We're like, lawyers? Like, I don't know, this is something like in the movie. So we had to like find lawyers, like set all the documents up. And by the time that everything was set up, he was like, yeah, I don't know anymore. Like, I'm not super liquid at this moment. Like, I was very excited, but maybe for another time. But then eventually that led to the next investors where we had our documents ready. There's like these tiny little things that you don't expect in advance, or if you're really prepared and if you're the right people along the road, especially in the beginning, it really helps out.
And that's, I think, part of the fun of the founder journey, right? Especially in those really early days, is just saying yes to things, or things being thrust at you and you think, I don't know how we're going to do it, but we'll figure out a way. We'll just say yes and we'll get there, you know?
Yeah.
Put those things in place. And then, like you said, it didn't end up working out that time, but it helped you to get those ducks in a row so that when it did happen, you were good to go. Yeah, amazing. That's good. And And what about the process of hiring that team and bringing those people in for a first-time founder? How was that?
Yeah, for me, like what we ended up doing is just hiring a bunch of friends. And I'm not sure if this is the right thing to do. Like, I really don't know. Like, this, do not consider that as
Depends
advice.
who your friends are, I guess.
Yeah, but for me, it was kind of a no-brainer because I knew a bunch of people who are super talented at what they're doing, like literally like top-notch engineers in computer science, in bioengineering, like knowing like things about like literally like experts on trees. And like they're amazing people. I know them, like I've been out with them, I've been on vacation with them. I know how they think, and they're a friend of mine for a reason. And if I have a chance to work with anybody, like I would love to work with them. And so those are the first like 3-4 people that we hired. We're literally just those people. And that allowed us to move really quickly and develop really quickly the sort of like set of proof points that we needed for this first couple of investments. And then like eventually like 2 days ago, like a new person has started, and that's sort of like the end point of a long search through LinkedIn and like it's like a whole HR thing. When like the moment you step outside of that friend boundary, like all of a sudden it takes so much more time, so much more money. And that's something I really like appreciate right now. Do ask me again in 2 years from now if it was a good decision. I'm not sure, but right now I really do think that it's one of the best decisions I've made so far.
Yeah. Oh, good, good. And I think that there's definitely value to hiring people that you know and are trusted if they've got the right expertise. And like you said, it helps you move further faster because you don't have to get to know each other and how each other work and think. A lot of that groundwork is done, has been created through that friendship that you had.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah,
what I would like to add to that as well is I think as a startup, you were like the first couple of people, you have to do everything. Like from talking to investors to lawyers to talking to customers to developing a front end website to back end and the machine learning and the product and the trees and there's so many things that you have to do. And there's no possible way that you one can already do everything, but then two can find the people that know how to like implement all of those things like as an expert, because you just have to few people. And then three, also you don't know where you're going as a startup because everything might change like a week from now, and
yeah,
there's like new opportunity or like a change in the market or whatever. There's like, especially in the beginning, everything changes so fast. So being able to hire somebody that you don't only like trust for their domain expertise, but also know I can just throw whatever the fuck comes our way
yeah.
towards them, and they'll be able to handle it in an expert way. That is just so interesting and so helpful in the beginning.
So valuable, absolutely. And what of those biggest challenges do you think that you've faced really in the last 18 months been?
It's a good question. I think for us specifically as a company within this climate tech space and specifically around carbon credits, it's kind of like an interesting space where there's also been like a little bit of a controversy around carbon credits, around greenwashing, around reporting more carbon that, so to speak, has been removed than actually was being removed, and it has
Yeah,
big consequences. So it's this interesting space where like right now some people are kind of like iffy around. They're like uncertain about like what's going on with it. But at the same time, we know that in the next 5, the next 10, 15 years, like this is one of the biggest challenges that we have is like finding enough ways to remove as much carbon as possible. So there's this huge, like hugely interesting opportunity between those two that we're trying to connect. And that means that sometimes you find people that are really forward looking and really excited to come along for the ride. But also, it means that sometimes it's a little bit harder to sell those first products, especially if they don't recognize your brand yet, if you haven't been able to build out that level of trust. So that's really for us, like what we are focusing on is really as a company building out that level of trust where people can rely on these type of measurements, where they know that if they work with Genvision, it's accurate, and it's going to be there for the long term.
amazing. And so where are you at today? What's the kind of snapshot of the current state of the business? You know, clients, pilots, where the product's at, the head count, like where are you at today?
Yeah, very exciting. Like one of our goals at the pre-seed round was to actually build this thing out, which was a fun thing that like lived in our heads. To actually build it out, test it out in the real world because it's a new technology that we're implementing. We're relying on all of those 3D models of trees to be able to train these machine learning models. which is a completely new approach. And like we didn't know, like we assumed it would be a good idea, but we were able to test it out, release a white paper a couple of weeks ago where it was tested on an entire forest, a ton of different tree species, where every individual tree was measured by hand, and it turned out our technology is 95% accurate in terms of carbon removal, which is just like really like unseen in the space, or like very, very exciting in any case.
Yeah,
And so with that, we've seen a bunch of companies, and they're interested in like we're currently working on the implementation of the first 4 or 5 carbon credit projects, which in itself is super exciting. Then also working together with governments to roll this out on a larger scale. So super cool things coming up.
That's very, very exciting. And how have you found this year from a kind of wider market and economy perspective? Because I know it's been really challenging for a lot of early stage startups. I mean, you've obviously managed to overcome that and, you know, closed your pre-seed round. And how have kind of regulatory changes, the wider market, how's that impacted you for better or for worse?
I've seen it with a lot of friends of mine in the startup space. It's definitely not an easy environment, and raising money at this point where investors are a little bit more wary or standards are much higher. It's just like it's a thing.
Yeah.
We're very lucky, I think, in the sense that one, we're early stage, like everything up until Series A, so far as I've heard, is really doing quite all right. But then most specifically, we're in the intersection, this like special Venn diagram of AI and sustainability, which is just like a very niche part of the market that's actually doing pretty well. There's been a lot of VC funds that have been raised that need to be deployed. And so we're seeing a lot of appetite for an upcoming seed round, although we're not even starting with it yet. So it's yeah, a very favorable position on our side, but definitely it's a rough market out there for most people.
Yeah. You're right. You're right at that kind of nexus of those two, like sexy markets, right? That AI piece and then the climate change, but not just climate change, carbon removal, and then the verification and
Right.
measurement. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's a hot market on the one end, but then it's like a different thing to me than it's, for example, like crypto or like Web3 or like other like specific like crazes. Because I don't know, like although it might be overhyped to some extent, we do know that like AI is here to like change a lot of things. It's making so many things much more efficient. And then secondly, we know climate, there's just like so much money that needs to be spent on it. So with those two things, we have like really, really strong backwinds, like whatever the hype cycle might be. We're pretty good there.
Yeah. And how hopeful do you feel for the future of the climate sector next year?
Next year, I was gonna answer the question in terms of how hopeful am I for the future, maybe for the Earth. Like
Yeah.
I'm pretty hopeful. We'll turn around. Like I'm like when I see all these developments, I get really excited about where we're heading.
Yeah.
In terms of where we will be next year, I don't know. Like it really like in terms of just like the planet, I'm very excited to be working on one of a small part that might turn out to be part of the solution. But who knows where we're heading? I think we need a lot more really bright people working on these type of problems.
Yes.
Very excited to see so many like new opportunities and new problems being solved. So super excited to see where we'll be a year from now.
Exciting. And in your world specifically, in Genvision's world, what are you most excited about? So you've had this kind of this initial big project that really shows that, you know, your platform is working to 95%
Yeah.
accuracy, which is amazing. But what does 2024 hold for you?
What's pretty amazing, and this is like really hot off the press, is that the European Union launched their own carbon removal certification framework. What that means is they launched their own regulation around carbon credits and bringing trust to the market, but by using new technologies. And this is something this sort of like other like has been gate kept like by these third parties like Fera or Gold Standard, which are really truly amazing organizations, but have generally been quite slow in developing new technologies. So having seen this new regulation come up from the European Union makes me super excited because it means that for one, on the policy side, are actually happening a lot. I mean, specifically in Europe then. But then also for us, it means that we can implement these things much faster. So that's for us, like where we're seeing 2024 become really important for Genvision and for the carbon credit removal space. in general is just Europe is going to be a big player in this space.
Very exciting. So we always round out these episodes with 3 quickfire questions for your recommendations. So the first one being a community or people-based resource. So which community, organization do you feel or you would credit has been the most helpful to you on your journey so far?
Already let's do it. ERA, Entrepreneurs Roundtable Accelerator, would recommend it 1,000,000%. I would do it 1,000 times over.
Amazing. And it was a 4-month program, you said?
Yes, in New York City.
In New York. Amazing. Perfect. Thank you so much. And the second one being a media-based resource. So a book, a podcast, a TED Talk, something like that that you feel has been valuable, insightful, and that you would recommend everybody read, listen, watch.
What actually has helped me myself a lot, and this was while I was still in school, not even thinking about starting and started myself, but just out of interest. I watched literally every video by a Y Combinator. They have so many like little podcasts that they're doing, as well as like Q&A session with Michael Seibel. Like this guy is amazing. Like I've watched every little like video recorded Corona session there is in the world to see, and just like he just like answers all of those like first time founder questions about funding, about where to start your company, what shape or form it should have, who to hire, all these little things. Like very much recommend it.
Amazing. And that's on YouTube, is it? Do Y Combinator have like a YouTube channel that has all that content in it?
Yeah, it's on YouTube.
Amazing. That's all. I've never looked at that myself, so I will. Thank you so much. And the last one being a productivity tip. What's the best tip for how you manage your workload and ensure that good work-life balance?
I don't have Instagram. I don't have TikTok. I barely have Facebook. Yeah, most of my communication happens by Gmail. That is my social media. I feel like it saves a lot of time for me. It also, we're not a B2C company, so I don't need to worry about it at all. I'm terrible at social media, but it also frees up so much of my time.
Amazing. So just disengaging from those social channels if they don't serve your business and they don't serve you personally, and thereby saving, I think if I did that, thereby saving many hours a day.
It has certainly saved me a lot of time for sure.
That's super helpful. Thank you so much, Emiel. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for sharing that journey and the experiences that you've kind of been through in your founder journey so far. And I'm super excited to see what 2024 has to hold for Genvision, and I will be watching and cheering from the sidelines. But thank you. Have a great rest of the day.
Sure, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much.
No problem. And thank you everybody that's listened to us today. Really appreciate you coming and joining us, whether you're watching us live or whether you're listening to this on catch up. We've got plenty more episodes to come at you over the course of the next 5 or 6 weeks. So please keep tuned in, subscribe and follow the Climate Pioneers show on Acast or Spotify. And hopefully we will see you next week. Thanks so much.